You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Welcome to A Life in Ruins podcast, episode 8. Today, we are excited to introduce our new series, Our Ruined Lives, which will air on the fourth Monday of every month, which means we are now dropping 2 A Life in Ruins episodes every month. The Our Ruined Lives episodes are a little different from our regular content. These aren't interviews, but dynamic conversation among colleagues about current topics in the field of anthropology. So without further ado, here is our friend and colleague, Damian Kirkwood, here to be our first guest on our first Our Ruined Lives episode. So how are you doing, Damian?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Dude, absolutely, of course. We're very excited to release this new episode series with you. So just for our listeners, could you tell us who you are, how you met us, and your educational background?
I'll try to hit all those points. Well, I'm currently a field supervisor with LTA, and that is a private CRM firm in Laramie, Wyoming. I mean, we typically work with evaluating features and hazards on the landscape that are related to historic hard rock mining and coal mining. And I know David and Connor from grad school here at the University of Wyoming, where I did my thesis, and that was focused in zooarchaeology. I'm a faunal analyst and a cut mark analyst, and my thesis research kind of helped develop methods for observing spatial patterning of faunal remains at mass kill sites using a statistical approach. The goal was to kind of look for assembly line butchering and how people organize themselves and their waste when they're butchering a large number of animals at one time, and also to test whether that's actually observable in the archaeological record.
So real quick before we continue, could you briefly explain to our listeners what zooarchaeology is and like some of the methods you use to look at cut marks and faunal analysis?
So zooarchaeology is an offshoot or a branch of archaeology that focuses on examining faunal remains or animal remains that are recovered from an archaeological context. And as far as the methods that I employ, it's usually macro and microscopic analyses. As far as cut marks go, my expertise are kind of using cut marks as a alternative dating method to identify protohistoric or contact era sites. And that would just mean looking at trying to identify stone cut marks versus metal cut marks, because oftentimes metal implements and the tools aren't left because they're valuable. They're not always recoverable at the excavations. And so they're often taken with them away from the site by the people using them, or they also disintegrate very easily. And so one way to look and try to date these type of protohistoric sites is to kind of use microscopic analyses to identify metal specifically, and stone.
And you have an article about that
in Plains,
out right now, in Plains, about how your blind test, a blind study of those two, where you were able to identify different cut marks based on their kind of their form and how they're
so there's diagnostic attributes that we use to differentiate between metal and stone. And what we did is we took kind of like an experimental approach to develop the methods. So we got some cow bones that were donated to us from a local butcher shop, and we had someone mark them up with metal and stone, like a biface and then like a metal knife. And then they would have the key, and they would test us on our accuracy based on what we used to classify a metal versus a stone implement. And actually, we spent over 300 hours doing these kind of blind tests, plus applying it to an actual faunal assemblage, which I think is the most time that someone spent looking at cut marks. And it kind of proved to be an actual reliable source for dating the protohistoric era. We had over 90% accuracy, which is quite high.
That's awesome, man.
So
yeah.
I have a real quick question. Are you going to Plains next week?
I'm not.
Oh, That's a bummer.
Why is that?
So yeah, for our listeners, the Plains Anthropological Society conference, which is my big subfield conference, is next week in Bloomington. And apparently, dude, there's hardly anyone coming. Like, it's usually fully booked for Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and they're only having one session Saturday morning because there's such a low turnout this year to go to Bloomington.
Oh, that's too bad. Where's it at again?
Bloomington, Indiana. It's being hosted by University of Indiana, Bloomington. So Dr. Schreiber, I believe, is the this year's host. But it'd been cool if you were going. I'm going. I'm looking forward to it. I'm about to win all the. I'm going to win all of the student competitions. Calling it right now.
There's more vests worn at that conference than there are at Sturgis, and it's really funny to me.
I'm pretty sure Dr. Marcel Kornfeld from University of Wyoming still wears the same leather vest that he wore to his first planes back in the 70s.
Oh, yeah, I
but
didn't know
no
it was
patches,
that old,
right?
But
Oh yeah, it's that old, according to some sources who have known him that entire time. That it's the same one, still going strong after all these years.
Yeah, he made it with stone tools, I heard.
Killed
And the
himself
hide and everything.
Yeah, killed the animal with an atlatl. Is probably one of the goats he had the students kill at field school, and just made it himself, and then just able to keep on going. But dude, that's awesome. I think I'm pretty sure you're the first zooarchaeologist that we've had on the show. Correct me if I'm wrong. Anybody?
yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Well, technically, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a fringe scientist.
What the fuck does that
That's
mean?
for sure.
I don't know. I don't know what that means. I regret saying that out loud on the air. So
This is a
Carlton,
science-only podcast. Don't you come in here with that pseudoscience bullshit and besmirch the good A Life in Ruins podcast name. We're too late in the game, David.
You guys, I just do. I don't even know what I'm going to say there. Damian, what's the difference between zooarchaeology and archaeozoology?
Oh, I don't know. Just the terminology, I suppose. I don't know. Do you know?
Okay. I mean, it was going to be a joke, and I was going to be like the Atlantic Ocean, but yeah, it's
okay.
yeah, like it's called archaeozoology overseas, and like you'll see a lot of journalists say, I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to like the audience in general, like Caleb Welch if he's listening, but like like archaeozoology is how it's called there, and then we just our normal.
I see.
Zooarchaeology. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and like most of my stuff, I am a zooarchaeologist, but I do focus a lot on taphonomy, or like what happens to an artifact or a bone after it's been deposited is more of my focus than anything. A bone is a bone, so it eliminates all the more subjectivity, I suppose, in my opinion, versus having like the cultural material where we have a lot of subjective and disagreement about a lot of things.
Yeah.
Tread lightly.
And taphonomy, that is Efemrov, right? Is that the scientist?
Yes.
Came up with that, and it's the transition of organic materials from the biosphere to the lithosphere. If I remember that right. Yeah.
Paleontology term.
Did you remember that, or did you look it up?
Oh, I remember that. The one thing I remember from graduate school. I mean, I remember a lot.
On a side note, what's the study of like Bigfoot called? Isn't there like a scientific or pseudoscientific name for that?
Cryptozoology.
Yeah, cryptozoology.
Cryptozoology. That's what it was. I thought that's what David was referencing. I was like, what, dude?
Or squatching to the layman's.
Squatching. Yeah. The Sam Squamch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which is always really funny. Hold on. Like I've always wanted to talk about Bigfoot.
Oh, I have a lot to say about Bigfoot.
Now is my chance to talk about the Sasquatch. if we're all comfortable with talking about Sasquatch in the context of the archaeological record.
Yeah, I'm down.
Sure.
David, you down?
Let's go.
Yeah. Do you mind if I state my opening statement?
State your opening statement.
Okay, so I'm a huge fan of primatology. Humans are primates. We are mammals that are primates. So take that with what it is. Primates are extremely social creatures. We all live in social groups. Even if there's like loners, like orangutan males who go off and do their thing, they eventually come back to a large like forest full of female orangutans where they're hanging out. So why is there one primate animal that just wanders around by itself for no reason. And everyone's like, oh, they don't want you to know they exist. Though, if it was a primate and it exists, it would hang out with a bunch of other primates wide in the open, loud as fuck, throwing shit everywhere. And it would be right in front of us.
I think he's asexual, actually.
He's self-reproducing.
Yep, self-reproducing.
Oh, that throws a wrench in my entire theory then. Yeah, I don't know. But
the reason why we don't have Bigfoot in the archaeological record is simple. Is that they didn't exist until the 1960s when L. Ron Hubbard, as part of the Black Lodge, summoned him and the other cryptids in a ruined summoning ceremony that brought all these creatures from another dimension, which is why we can't find them in the archaeological record. So Bigfoot, Chupacabra, the Yeti.
Is that the Bohemian Grove?
They're not from this dimension, and that's why they were introduced in the 60s, and that's why you got to be careful. It's all L. Ron Hubbard's fault.
You know what else was introduced in the 60s was drugs. Psychedelics. That could be also an explanation.
No coincidence.
Yeah. But it's kind of funny though, because what I love about those stories, like when people talk about like Sasquatch, the Thunderbird, or all these other cryptids, is when they talk about them, that is when Native American oral traditions are like validated. Like, oh, but the Indians talk about it, or it's on rock art.
Right.
But in any other context, those people are completely ignored, and like none of their stories about what things happen are validated unless it's being used largely by the cryptozoology community, which I think is just a fascinating cultural phenomenon of picking and choosing your evidence.
They get money to do this stuff. It's wild.
That's my main beef, is that like they are actually, I know a guy who is kind of associated with the University of Wyoming through a bunch of different avenues, who's actively getting funding to do cryptozoological research. And I think it was even more than the funding that we had for being out there for doing, archaeological research, which is crazy. So it's like, it's just getting funneled into these, like, I don't know, like Discovery Channel excitement, like, we're going to find the next Squatch thing.
Yeah, reality TV. And they edit the shit out of you. Yeah.
Just for our listeners, the United States, I'm pretty sure, has the largest population of archaeologists in any country. I think we're a couple thousand. And the United States is one of the most heavily archaeological investigated countries, meaning that the amount of archaeological investigation that has gone on and has not yielded any sort of evidence about Sasquatch. I mean, that's what it comes from. You can talk about something hanging out in the woods or it doesn't see people, but if they're that recent, you wouldn't find fossils, you'd find bones and you'd find remains. And we find remains of a lot of animals in varying states of decay. But the fact that we haven't found any single evidence, I mean, like, granted, like, where does, when a Sasquatch uses the Sasquatch bathroom, which I imagine they use Charmin Ultra toilet paper, super soft. That was the commercial with the bear joke, but
I got
moving
you.
on.
Scott,
That's another sponsor of yours, I'm sure.
Yeah, Charmin Ultra.
Shout out to Charmin, trying to get that sponsorship.
Just working, yeah, Charmin. Yeah, like they're like, I mean, you're zooarchaeologists. Like, there'd be bones, there'd be other physical remains associated with it, and we haven't found any form of evidence, biologically speaking, for Bigfoot. And every time they do a DNA study on hair that's found, it always comes out as bear.
Yeah, well, that's what I think a lot of people mistake, because they see bears probably standing on their hind legs, and they see them from afar, and so it probably looks like a Bigfoot, but it probably is just a bear, and the mind playing tricks on you or whatever.
Yeah,
like the human mind is like notoriously like not good at remembering things, and conflates and misremembers things, like, notoriously.
I'm going to throw something out there that's maybe controversial, but to play devil's advocate about not finding remains, how we find a lot of, well, not a lot, but we find mostly mammoth remains, and we conclude that there's probably a large subsistence on mammoths, and in my opinion, we find mammoth bone more often because it's just a bigger bone, so it takes longer time for it to disintegrate, and then you won't find it. Unlike small mammals and things like that, those bones are going to disappear faster from the landscape than a large mammal.
Didn't we have this talk in
yes, we did. And I am so goddamn excited that Damian has brought this up. Oh, dude, it's like you find people think that Clovis and Folsom people were big game hunters because all we do is look for big game sites. Mm-hmm. Like no one goes crazy over the latest rabbit kill finding. Like we just don't find the small mammals or the small animals because they don't last in the archaeological record as well as big bones. Mm-hmm. So like there's a bias in the Paleo-Indian community looking at these people as big game hunters if they do.
I agree.
For that reason, it's because that's what we find. It's like 2 years ago when I was at University of Wyoming, they rounded everybody up in the middle of the winter because they found a mammoth out in the middle of Wyoming. They rounded up grad students to go and find that. Now, would they do that with any other archaeological site?
No, probably not.
Exactly. Boom. Fucking jewel drop.
Yeah.
So another sidebar or devil's advocate there, when the public is aware that there's mammoth bones or they find mammoth bones eroding out of a cut bank, wouldn't it be pretty pertinent for archaeologists to go scientifically dig that out as quick as possible so that people don't steal that mammoth bone then? Because they're pretty dope, and I would love mammoth bone gauges.
Yeah, but
well, they found. I know in the context of the Wyoming case that it turned out not to be anthropological, meaning that there was no human activity associated with it. So they
didn't have the paleontologist with them either. So it should be a joint effort probably with archaeology and paleontology, just in case that there's no, cultural association, that it's, a paleontological find rather than archaeological.
We're talking to Rudy now.
And I'll tell real quick, I was caught up in it too. So not to say that I was not a fan. When I heard there was a mammoth, I was super excited. It wasn't actually until I talked to Alex Crabe, who I mention way too frequently for someone that doesn't listen to our podcast.
Yeah, we got a crush.
God, he's a gorgeous, beautiful man from Northern Virginia. He's the one that actually calmed me down. He was the one that was like, dudes, he was like, Carlton, it's just a giant elephant. Who cares? Don't get worked up at it. There's other things in the archaeological record that are just as exciting. Don't conflate this. And he was right. And I've definitely reconfirmed my views. And I think my current advisor has definitely done that as well. So that's just my little beast. I don't want to be totally on my own high horse, but I was totally caught up in it too.
Well, I think all this, proves is that there's the potential that Bigfoot was around, but it just got destroyed.
Yeah. Speaking of destroyed, so's this segment. So let's go to the next one. All right. Hey, Caleb. Hey, Mom. If you guys are listening to this podcast and you made it to the second session, we're back with Damian Kirkwood. And we're going to talk to Damian about how he got into archaeology. So, Damian, I'm going to ask you the question I just asked. How'd you get into archaeology?
Well, it was actually kind of a long process. I kind of grew up in the field. My dad's a geologist. He's got his master's in geology. So I kind of just grew up being in the field all the time, and actually thought that's what I was going to do. Like a lot of archaeologists, you start out with an interest probably in paleontology or something like that. But I actually didn't know how to get into becoming an archaeologist. I didn't even know that was a path yet. And so when I was in community college where I started, I pretty much took every subject that you could. I changed my major so many times. It was English, history, humanities, you name it. And psychology, I was actually 6 credits away from having a bachelor's in psychology.
Shine away from those math degrees, huh?
Yeah. Once I got done with community college, I found out that anthropology was an option, and it actually encompasses all of those disciplines. And underneath that was, the 4 fields. So biological anthropology, linguistics, cultural, and archaeology. And then it was oh, that's how you do it. You have to go through anthropology to get into archaeology. So I was always kind of interested in history and things like that. But I just didn't know how to get there. And then I got to the University of Wyoming, and then it all clicked.
I feel like that's the most romantic part of archaeology, at least it's romanticized in popular films and whatnot, is that field aspect. I mean, you can talk about Jurassic Park, you can talk about Indiana Jones. There's this fascination, and love of the field by people who actually do it. But I feel like this is not even remotely controversial. I feel like fieldwork is not well represented in popular media.
No.
like the reality of it all.
I mean, the only like I guess exposure to field work I had growing up as a kid, like knowing about it, was like in Jurassic Park, that scene where they're with that stupid fucking radar machine that doesn't exist, but they're out in the field. You know, that's the first time I saw that, and I was like, oh, that's what a field science is, I guess, when I got to school. But I don't know. So growing up with your dad doing stuff in the field, like, what was that like?
It was very helpful, actually, for my future, because I became very familiar with lithic materials at a very young age and seeing artifacts on the ground and things like that. So, you know, I guess when I would see it in movies, it was definitely not represented how I saw it, like living it, you know. So it is kind of weird to see how the field of archaeology is represented in film and just in popular culture. I think, you know, that amount of paperwork and the excavations, the, you know, management of the data is definitely not entertaining for the masses. You know, you'd rather see somebody out there with a whip and, you know, punching people.
I think that's my biggest beef, is that no one's doing paperwork in anything. It's like, come on, that's like 90%, not 90%, but like 60% of actual field work is like organizing and trying to figure out what the heck you did for the last couple weeks and stuff. And it's not easy.
Someone's handwriting that you're like, what the fuck did that person write?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Like, I guess on the topic of Indiana Jones, like, do you think that's a positive or a negative, you know, representation, or is it both? I mean, or is there anything that's actually correct about it even?
So I definitely want to point out that as we talk about Indiana Jones, one of our colleagues and who will be interviewed for episode 8, 9. What episode is this?
This is 8. Ocho.
Oh, yes,
ESPN
for episode
9.
Ocho. Episode 9, Dig It with Raven. She just dropped a new video on YouTube, Archaeologists React to Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark. So I highly recommend our viewers to definitely check that out. She does good work and we all know where this is going. Like,
yeah. What's the...
Do we want to be militant about this, or do we want to be like calm and serene?
So I'll open with a qualifier. I liked Indiana Jones as a kid. I watched the shit out of it.
Your
Here we go. See, I'm gonna get ridiculed for this, and I'm gonna. People tell me this all the time, and maybe that's why I'm a failure. But like, I really enjoy Indiana Jones, and like, I got into archaeology, and I was like, you know what? I really like archaeology. I like history. I like old things. Not a huge fan of Nazis, so like, you know, checks out. And then I went to school, got into it, and then I realized when I was doing history, I switched to anthropology because that was cooler. And then I was like, oh, you can do archaeology with anthropology. Oh, and that's how I do archaeology. Took a class, and I was like, okay, so Indiana Jones is just not an archaeologist at all, but I'm still doing archaeology, so this is awesome.
Yeah,
and
but agreed.
I think that's a positive. Yeah.
I mean, everyone loves it. It's Hollywood, and then you actually get into the field, and it's like, oh, this is wrong. He's not an archaeologist. He's a looter, and he just destroys everything where he goes.
Oh, yeah, he's the definition of a looter.
And the fourth movie is definitely the worst. Not a fan.
Are we talking Crystal Skull?
Oh, we're talking Crystal Skull.
I loved it.
Nope.
Opening statement, Carlton.
Yeah.
Let's hear it.
Last Crusade. I love the Last Crusade. Give me Sean Connery any day.
You have chosen poorly.
Well, did you guys see that article I sent you earlier today? The Chicago Tribune from 2014. They actually have excerpts from George Lucas's transcript when he was talking to Spielberg about Indiana Jones. And so essentially what he says is Indiana Jones is intentionally going to be like an outlaw archaeologist. He's, educated with a PhD. He's a doctor, but he's kind of fed up with that life. And so he just becomes a grave robber for hire. And that's George Lucas's words. So it's almost kind of weird that, archaeologists gravitate towards this character, but even George Lucas was like, yeah, this isn't, he's not actually an archaeologist. Okay. He's just a grave robber.
His character is loosely based on a real life archaeologist though, isn't he?
There's a couple, I think. I don't know much about them. Maybe you guys know these names. Leonard Woolley, Hiram Bingham III, and Roy Chapman Andrews. And they're all pseudo-archaeologists, mainly explorers, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're before the field develops into a real academic profession. It's like early 20th, late 19th century archaeology, where it's basically just people with money running around the globe, just looting.
Look at these fascinating artifacts of the Amazon, and then bring them back home, and they're like, yeah.
Wasn't Hiram Bingham the person who took the Incan stuff from Machu Picchu?
Yeah, he published The Lost City, I think is the book, and saying that it was the last city, I believe.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's our history, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting
the last city.
Like the last lost city? Is that what he's saying?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Are you flipping through a book to find this out right now?
No, I took some notes earlier,
Oh, nerd.
I had my, I'm sorry. One of my favorite archaeologists that's portrayed in films. Have you guys ever seen The Lost City of Z?
Mm-mm.
You guys have missed out. It came out on Amazon. The lead actor is the same actor from Sons of Anarchy. And you guys are not anywhere near as psyched for this as you need to be.
Well, it's about him finding a Mayan city, right? It's early exploration into the Yucatan, right?
No, close. So it's actually based on a real life dude. His name is Percy Harrison Fawcett, British military officer, and he was enlisted by, I think, the British Geographical Society to basically go out to the jungles of Brazil. And basically he was meant to map the borders between the disputed territories between some countries in South America. But while he was there and he went up this river that no one was able to get up to, he finds pottery out in the jungles. And he does not know what is going on. Comes back to the British, the Geographical Society upon his return, treated as a hero, and was I found evidence of pottery of this long lost civilization. This civilization could have been more advanced than London at the time, and he was berated because this is the early 19th century, early 20th century, late 18th. And or late 19th, sorry. And the fact, and this is during a time when ethnocentrism was rampant. It's at the the dawn of all these colonizing empires, and they were not a fan of it. But he went back to prove them wrong, and spent his entire life going back. He had to take a break during World War I because he was a major in the British Army, and his buddies that went on expedition with him went on expedition with him to Brazil became his troops in World War I. He lost a couple. Afterwards he goes back, and I believe he goes back with his son, and they just disappear, never seen again. And I like the movie is great. It's called The Lost City of Z. It was on Amazon. I don't think it's there anymore, but it's a much better accurate retelling of a real life representation of archaeology in some of these expeditions. Because I'm not sure how Percy Fawcett was in real life, but in the movie, he's very much portrayed as an explorer and a scientist who's no, there's evidence here for something. We need to look at this. And it's not till, almost 100 years later when people are doing some of these surveys of Brazil and they're finding evidence for roads and this civilization that Percy first argued for existed and was totally lambasted for it.
Oh, that's really interesting. I'd be really interested to see if he actually took anything back. I don't know if it mentions it in the movie, because I think that's,
he definitely brought
you can
back
be excited.
Yeah.
I mean, that might be the history of that, but go ahead, Dave.
Chris, do you want to pop in and say what that book was? Because I'm not sure exactly what that is.
So this guy, Justin Jacobs, Indiana Jones in History. So this guy wrote this book about basically the real stories behind Indiana Jones. He had a lot of that stuff that Damian was talking about from Spielberg and George Lucas about how they were talking about who they were basing Indiana Jones on and things like that. But then he also talked about the idea of archaeology in the 30s and how it was saw and how that kind of parallels some of what Indiana Jones is is doing in the movies. And it's an interesting read. It really is. It's an academic book. It's not like a quack book, but and he talks about a little bit about the fifth movie that's supposed to be out in 2020 apparently, but I haven't heard much more about that. I don't know if that's still real.
That's interesting that you bring that up, because that was kind of one of my points that I wanted to ask you guys was, do you think that, Indiana Jones is kind of representing salvage anthropology? And I think that may translate to, contemporary archaeologists too, because his whole goal is kind of like, saying that he has the ownership of this cultural material that he's like searching for, and then you never see what he really does with it. And then it's like, well, he's the authority and he's the expert. So, of course, Indiana Jones should have it. And I kind of feel like it's kind of on the nose a little bit about, professional archaeologists in some cases.
Grab the idol and run.
Yeah. I think they say loot and scoot.
Loot and scoot. So for our listeners, that book that our producer Chris, who hangs out on our episodes behind the scenes that you guys don't know about, also the Webster Dictionary for when you guys totally get fucked up with our definitions. They talk about it on the Archaeology Show, episode 38 here on the Archaeology Podcast Network. So for our listeners, go check that out. They'll go into it in detail, so we don't have to. But do I think he represents salvage archaeology? I don't know. I think the best representation that the Indiana Jones movies talk about is like the real life Nazi archaeological missions.
Like they went out there looking
like
for
that.
all
That's
stuff.
That's real. Like the SS brought in academics from Germany who were archaeologists, like made professors SS. I hope Trump makes me part of the Space Force, but yeah, actually like brought people into the SS and like sent them out to go carry these missions to find evidence for an Aryan race to support their nationalist ideologies and their, Aryan supremacy, which is totally bullshit. And they flooded the academic literature in the 1930s and 40s with utter
bullshit.
Garbage. Yeah, just utter bullshit. So I think that's an accurate representation. In Indiana Jones, like that's a real life thing. They're not just pulling a movie bad guy, but there was really an archaeological bad guy, and there are today. They're called ISIS. That they exist.
There's more than just them too, but yeah.
ISIS plus.
Yeah, racist plus. I agree. I think I can see it representing Indiana Jones, representing kind of the Victorian era of archaeology, and also this kind of salvage portion. And you see that salvage portion pretty upfront and stuff. I listened to the audiobook Monuments Men, where they go and try to there's that whole army division going to find stuff that the SS has taken and is actively confiscating. So I think you can see
they made a movie about
steps
that.
Into both. Yeah, and it was actually a pretty good movie.
Damon.
John Goodman, yeah.
There were some really good actors in that. Like surprisingly,
a classy lineup. Yeah.
Yeah. Who was it? Bill Murray? Was he in it?
Clooney, Goodman. Who else is in it?
Yeah, Bill Murray's in it.
Damon, Bill Murray. Yeah.
Yeah. Great movie. I've never read the book because I don't have time to read things that I want to read. But,
you mentioned Space Force there, Carlton. Damian, didn't you mention something about Picard being an archaeologist? Can you talk more about that?
Oh, yeah. It's kind of funny because we're talking about this as, these older explorers, and it was kind of like a luxury to do this. And in Star Trek: The Next Generation, Jean-Luc Picard is an archaeologist. It's a hobby of his. And so he has a deep knowledge of a lot of different cultures and their histories. And he's also kind of a collector of artifacts. And that's why he's the best captain, because he's an archaeologist.
I had no clue that he was an archaeologist. Like, I kind of want to watch that show now just because he's an archaeologist.
Well, I think you should, and not to sound too nerdy, but it is very anthropological in its nature, I think.
Like the Prime Directive is like what Jane Goodall tried to do, but fucked up.
Yeah. Observe and report, minimal disturbance on cultures. Let them do what they are doing, try to understand them, cultural relativism, try to understand it from their perspective.
Wait. What did Jane Goodall do? Why are you hating on the chimp lady?
I love Jane Goodall. Like, she's changed the field. She's
Shots
a wonderful
fired.
scientist, like a huge inspiration to me. But there's a lot of flack that she gets in the primatology field for like just literally hanging out with the chimpanzees she was studying, and like it might have biased her like opinions of what they were doing sometimes, and like attaching names to them and doing specific things. But like she named some of them Frodo and stuff, which she did milestones for the field. It's just, is that the right way to do it? We don't know. But that was the 60s. So.
Well, let's continue this during the next segment, because the Klingons are on their way. They're upset with the way that Jane Goodall is interacting with the chimpanzees. So once we get this whole thing sorted out, we'll be right back with segment 3.
Welcome back to episode 8. We are in the section 3 of A Life in Ruins podcast, and that was a beautiful mess, but we're still going through. And I was going to ask you, Damien, do you think Jean-Luc Picard is kind of how we view modern looters? I mean, he's super knowledgeable about the areas he goes to, and he might do a little bit of collecting on the side, which is something I think that looters do as well. Like, they're really comfortable with the material culture of their areas, and they might put it in their pocket every once in a while.
Well, I would never disrespect Jean-Luc Picard. So I would say he may represent a looter, but it's hard to say, because whenever they kind of show him engaging in archaeology or something like that, it's not clear whether it's on the holodeck, which they could just replicate excavations or something like that, or the artifacts that he has displayed are actually from the replicator. They could just recreate them. So I don't know if I would say he's looting per se, but I do think he probably has a relatable, analogous depth of knowledge that looters probably have, like contemporary looters.
If only we all had the replicator, man. I mean, that would make archaeology so much easier.
Yeah, that'd be great.
It's called 3D printing.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah, is that instant? How long does that take?
That's not.
You still need matter.
Yeah, true. You gotta have filaments and stuff.
Technically, you don't need matter.
So, to be determined if Picard is a looter, but in order, I'm not going to besmirch the good captain's name. So, Connor, watch your goddamn mouth.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, I've got something.
Uh-oh.
You should get it checked out.
Yeah, go talk to Doc, man.
Let's talk 10,000 BC. Yeah, so that collective groan is what I'm experiencing right now too. Damien, you were to refresh yourself last night and graced your eyes with that movie for an hour and a half, didn't you?
Oh yeah, I was like, hey, I haven't seen that in a while, and I don't remember much, so I had to revisit it. And let me tell you, it was hard to sit through. But I did look something up that I thought was interesting. That movie costed about $1 million to make, and it grossed $270 million. So
wait,
technically, it was a
It
success.
only cost $1 million.
$100 million.
Oh,
okay. Exactly.
Wait, how much did they rake in?
And then it grossed $270 million. So I think we can say that this was a success. And I'm wondering, does this prove that there's actually like a market for movies about prehistory, or is it just like random luck that it was a success?
If I remember correctly, that had a huge marketing campaign, and I was like, all right, I'm amped about this. And then I went and saw it in the theater and was like, I got diarrhea, dude. It was the worst. I didn't know what to do.
I would say it shows that there's like a market for fantastical prehistory more than it does like show that it's actual. People want to learn about the past. They're more interested in some dude riding a mammoth onto the pyramids because that's accurate.
And then I think Jack Black and Michael Cera had that one movie that came out right after it.
Year
One.
One.
A parody of it.
Yeah.
Year One. That movie was great. But Connor, to answer your question, did any of you guys see Alpha?
No,
I did.
I haven't.
Yeah. That one was pretty good. Also had a huge marketing campaign and kind of like seemed to have fallen flat, but like they did a great job. They had a French archaeologist like teach them how to flint knap and everything in the movie, and they actually wore clothes.
But Dennis Stanford was used as a consultant for the archaeology and the spear points. And did you recognize what kind of spear points were on those bad boys?
The original name for the movie was going to be called the Salutrian, and they changed it.
Makes me so fucking angry.
Do you know Dennis Stanford recently died?
I had to catch myself there from saying.
Yeah, I was going to say, he just passed away recently.
He was a good archaeologist with some interesting views. We will miss him.
But I feel like if they had promoted that as like a Salutrian thing, it still would have like sold, because that's like fantastical and like, you know, like, oh, Europeans were here before Native Americans or something like that. And it can build into like an ideology of like a not good ideology.
Oh, it'd have been on the next Hitler Youth watch list if it was called the Salutrian thing. Like, it'd have been like the neighborhood block party for the KKK viewing. Like, to
the director and the producers, like credit, I did see online they changed the name because of the controversy, and they didn't want to like side with like who's right, who's wrong on that, and they were like, let's just make it a movie about ancient France, and I thought that was like kind of chill.
No, that was
they
great.
Tried to be The Revenant, and they filmed it before The Revenant, I think, and then like The Revenant was just way better of a movie, and then they were like, all right, well, we have to release this now.
Well, I'm sure it was better than Alpha, but you know.
Yes, it was.
I love The Revenant.
Alpha was pretty good. No, Alpha, I enjoyed Alpha. Like, I was like,
yeah,
that's dope.
I think
If you want my opinions on the dog domestication, check out the post on my account. But like, I'm not gonna go into it now. But it does all right.
I think
I was pleased with it. I left happy.
The Revenant probably suffers from the same thing 10,000 BC did, where it was geographically very confusing. It was hard to tell what was going on, like where they were supposed to be. Yeah, and I felt that way in The Revenant too. You know, like, it was supposed to be South Dakota.
They filmed it in Alberta.
There's like looming mountains and a very like almost like Pacific Northwest kind of like forest in there. And I don't know. It's very confusing.
Yeah. Well, like, environmental filming aside, because like, I don't think there's really any pristine areas left in, you know, those states. Yeah. You know, I imagine it's hard to like Wind River was filmed in Park City, Utah.
Right.
Oh, was it really?
Yeah, it wasn't filmed in Wyoming. It was filmed in Park City, and they don't even have Shoshones and Arapahoes. They have I want to say Ute actors, because I'm pretty sure Tribe bankrolled that movie, and so they hired actors and extras from that tribe that bankrolled it. But if you don't know anything about Wyoming or Native American culture, then you wouldn't know or care. Speaking of Native Americans, what do we think about Last of the Mohicans?
You know, actually, back to The Revenant.
I felt attacked. I was like,
the one thing I didn't like was the son's name was Hawk. I thought like they could have tried a little better.
They took my boy.
You know?
Yeah, I mean,
well, hold on. Being Pawnee and knowing the Pawnee naming system, that is an adequate name. They were consulted, because you have in Pawnee culture, you can have many different names over the course of your life, but you have like a child's name that's given to you, and then you get another name that's more associated with whatever you have done. So most of the time, like, kids' names are like really simple, because they're not trying to talk about some sort of event that the child has done. So like Hawk is rather adequate.
Well, that's fair, but he didn't even have a son, though. You know what I mean? So
yeah, and in real life he did. Yeah, in real life he didn't.
It just seems kind of like
there's like
in real life they just stole.
Yeah, they're just
gun,
slapping that in there.
He was,
you know,
like, chasing this guy.
I don't know.
Because I mean, a filial relationship is a little more understandable and grips an audience better. But
yeah,
that's just me being a Hollywood elitist.
and the dude, I mean, the real story I think is far more fascinating than the movie telling. The movie telling I thought was like pretty good, but like the real story of that man is crazy.
It's hard.
Yeah.
And he ended up getting killed by the Riccara later in his life on another expedition. They killed him
in St. Louis.
They did not kill him in St. Louis.
Someone died in St. Louis that I remember reading about, and I was like, what?
Nope, he died in North Dakota.
A lot of people have died in St. Louis.
But and then he was also like he actually never even killed the dude. Like in the movie, he kills the antagonist, but in real life he doesn't. In real life, the antagonist actually
Jim Bridger died in St. Louis. That's right. He was in the movie though. That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
And he actually escapes and is able to join the army. And then the guy's like, listen, if you ever leave the army, I'll fucking kill you. But then he ends up dying anyways, fighting the Arikaru again.
I watched the extras of that movie just because I really enjoyed it. And apparently they were trying to film that final scene where like he's fighting Tom Hardy in the snow. And they were going to do that in Alberta. But when they went to go film it, it was like sunny and hot there at like the wrong time of the year. And they were like, well, shit. So they flew to Patagonia to film that scene because it was still cold there. And like Wyoming wasn't like snowy at that point too, because it's just like the climate was just not right. And they're like, oh no. But
they're jumping continents.
I mean, that's how it is with Hollywood. I mean, like, first off, Lord of the Rings wasn't even filmed in the Middle Earth. It was filmed in New Zealand.
Exactly.
You take that
back.
Oh my God, get out of here. Can I ask if you thought that there was good representation of Native Americans when he was in The Revenant, when he was going and, hanging out with them? Do you think that was accurate? I mean,
to my understanding, yeah, they did the Arikaru as well. And they did the Pawnees when the Pawnees did show up. But then there's like that scene of like an Earth Lodge village of Pawnees being burned down, which like never happened. So there was like some historical inaccuracies, of course, when it comes to that. But like in terms of the dress, the language, it was all great. Like they brought in indigenous supervisors and cultural liaisons to help out with that, and like language coaches. I think the Pawnee language coaches actually they came out of Indiana Bloomington, and representatives from Pawnee, Oklahoma. Yeah, Bloomington has a very big history with working with native languages, which is funny, which is interesting because like I'll talk to people about Revenant and they're like, I don't understand how, because the point when a hawk dies and he's just kind of left there and the Arikaru find him and they're like, oh, he's a Pawnee boy. Some of my friends like, how would they know? It's like, well, there's these intrinsic differences in dress that kind of portray that. And
pretty sure he was wearing colonial clothes though in the movie, or like
I'd have to double check, but like you can tell differences, marks, tattoos, hairstyles.
Yeah.
But there's definitely realistically ways you can differentiate people. Like they're not homogenous Native Americans where everyone wears the same clothes and does the same thing.
Yeah.
You can fit Europe a couple times inside America, the continental United States, and even North America in general. Like the variances in cultures and beliefs is just astounding.
Yeah. And
I'll get off my soapbox.
I really dug, like, speaking as a non-native though, but like the apocalyptic tone of the movie, like it just was like dark and sad, and like there's no light in the movie, and like there's this whole like genocide with the Native Americans going on at the same time, and it's like genocide's not cool, but the way they work that into the movie, it's like also like a side plot of the movie is just like, oh yeah, Native Americans are just like losing all of their culture to like this expansionist American way of life.
Official stance of the Life in Ruins podcast is we do not condone or support genocide.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna always stand by that and not support that.
Yeah, but another good movie. Shit, it's not even archaeologically related, but it's like Hostel.
What?
Hostiles.
Hostel is like a song.
Yeah, Eli Roth. I was like, I don't know, man.
Yeah, I was like that.
Hostiles was good. Christian Bale, Wes Studi, right?
Yeah, Wes Studi was in it. He's actually, I think, one of the first Native American actors getting an Emmy.
I don't think I've seen that.
So
really?
It's I'm good. He's Cherokee. Support him. He also played a Pawnee in Dances with Wolves, the movie that shall not be talked about. And yeah, the reason why I love that movie is because like at the beginning of it, they make Native Americans look like the villains, but by the end of it, they go through this whole colonial transformation and realizing, the deprivations of Manifest Destiny. And at the end, they all end up getting killed by pissed off white ranchers who didn't care about the United States government or anything else. And it's, it was an interesting transformation.
Like, they come together with like coming to grips with their like grief and suffering. Like it was an interesting movie.
And it wasn't blatant about it. Like it wasn't blatant. That's what I liked. It was subtle. Like there was a subtle change in the tone, but You know what? Wasn't
Speaking of like new things going on right now, can I change the subject?
please.
Is that appropriate? Yeah. So there's the movie's not out right though. William is the new movie about kind of
Came out in
Neanderthals
April
and-
2019, I think.
Oh crap! I haven't
I need
seen
to
yeah,
check
it was
this out.
it
What's
was
it
a
about?
limited viewing.
I don't think
'cause I was going to go
anyone's
see
seen
it. Yeah, it was a limited viewing. I wanted to see it because it came to Denver, but we were actually at SCA's when it came out or something like that, so I missed it. I want to see it, and for our listeners that were wondering what we're talking about, it's called William, which makes it super hard to search.
Yes.
And it's about a Neanderthal human hybrid boy. So like the parents are geneticists or paleoanthropologists, something along those lines, and they basically spliced an embryo of the woman with, I think it's semen of a Neanderthal, or they created something weird. Anyways, you get a
Nice.
hybrid baby.
Yeah.
And it's this like coming to terms movie about this boy who's like half Neanderthal, half Homo sapien, like growing
So-
up in the real world, modern era.
Is the official stance of a Life Nerds podcast then that Neanderthals and humans can be hybridized? Or
Well, yeah, I mean,
I thought you thought something differently.
Oh, I do, David. I'm glad you brought that up. Damien,
Yeah.
we talked
Let's let
about
our
this last
guest
time.
talk.
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
let our guest talk about it.
okay, so I think I know where this is going. So I'm going to preface this first by saying I do believe in extinction, but usually when it's a catastrophic event and the population does not pass on any genetic material and it's not observable in the living populations. And
That's
just
fair.
to clear this up, we're talking about what a species technically is, right? And so if we think of the old traditional definition of a species, it's usually organisms that can produce fertile offspring with one another, right? So you have dogs, shout out to David, Rachel Shimmick. You have horses, shout out to Cassidy Thornhill. And if horses mated with like a donkey, shout out to Sean Carroll. Those offspring would be infertile, right? And so
That man is not infertile, I can tell you that.
So, the offspring of the mules are going to be infertile, right? So they're not passing on successful genetic material, okay? And so it gets really complex when you're talking about modern humans and our hominin ancestors, particularly in Neanderthals and, as more data is being recovered, the Denisovans, because they're now entering this discussion. And so, like, some people argue that species should actually just be defined as groups of organisms sharing a mix of anatomical, behavioral, and genetic traits that distinguishes them from other groups. Okay, and so based on that definition, rather than the old traditional definition, it's hard for me to accept the word being thrown around of extinction for things like Neanderthal and Denisovans, actually. And so I know this is controversial, but
that's a fair assessment.
yeah, if I think if
I agree with Damien 100%.
genetic material is passed on, then I think they're observable and still living within us, technically.
So what's your species name though? You're on the spot.
My species name? What do you mean?
Or like what do you call Neanderthals? What's their species?
Well, I mean, they're Homo neanderthalis, right?
Oh.
That's where I disagree.
And so they all, I think it's Heidelbergensis. I'm not a biological anthropologist, so I'm going to put this out there. But, we have, I think, Heidelbergensis leaving Africa, and then it branches to Neanderthals and Denisovans, and then some of them stayed and became Homo sapiens, which some people say archaic Homo sapiens. So even them, like, they would be different than us, contemporary Homo sapiens. And then them integrating with each other, those three, producing successful offspring and carrying that genetic material, I'm not sure I would say they're technically extinct.
Sure.
Sweet. So real quick, because we have to tie this up, Connor, what's the species name? Just shout it out, no explanation.
Homo neanderthalensis, that one.
What?
David?
Homo sapiens Neanderthalensis to me.
That's the one.
And then Damien, you said Homo neanderthalensis?
Yeah.
I'm going with Homo sapiens. Nope. Homo sapiens. If we can interbreed.
I take my Neanderthals the way I was learning them.
All right.
See, I thought you were asking what people call it.
No, got you. Well, guys, we gotta wrap it up. Damian, thank you so much. Is there anything you'd like to, guys? Yeah, was there anything you'd like to plug real quick?
Yeah, my Instagram is latifrons_88, and also search North Arrow Archaeology. That's my consulting company with Cassidy Thornhill, and we do faunal analyses and consultant work. So look us up.
Sweet.
Hell yeah.
Well, everyone, that was episode 8 of A Life in Ruins podcast. That was our first host for our new Our Ruin Lives episode, Damian Kirkwood, our buddy from University of Wyoming, and we are out. Unlike the Neanderthals.
Oh my God. Nope. Homo sapiens Neanderthalensis.
Thanks for listening to A Life in Ruins podcast.
You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at A Life in Ruins Podcast, and you can also email us at alifeinruinspodcast@gmail.com.
And remember, make sure to bring your archaeologists in from the cold and feed them beer. All right. A prehistoric kid named Pig asks his dad what weapon he should use to hunt with. What does his dad say?
Atlatl.
Oinkaladdle.
Atlatl do, Pig.
I hate you.
Jesus. That was actually pretty good.
This show is produced by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in Reno, Nevada at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.